Second graders, it's Mrs. Keenholtz, and today we are going to be using a new booklet that looks like this. It says Individual Student Progress Tracking Pages, and it's its own little workbook that you're going to be completing one page at a time with the class. So the first thing we're going to be doing is, in your booklet, we'll be reading the passage together, so it's going to be really important that you follow along, and then we'll be answering these questions that are off to the side. So we're not going to answer the questions yet. Even though you think you might know the answers, don't fill those questions or don't circle answers yet, okay? So we're going to be reading this story. It is on the first page, page number 1. You'll see there's a little number 1 in the corner, and it is called The Ants and the Grasshopper. So when we read that story, we're going to answer the questions. Now, a really great test-taking strategy is to read the questions first so you know what you're reading to find out. What are they going to be asking me when we're all done with this? So we have the opportunity to look at those questions. So let's do that now. With my finger, I'm going to touch number 1. Number 1, what happens at the beginning of this story? So in my brain, I think, okay, I'm going to have to pay attention to what happens at the beginning. Number 2, what happens at the end of this story? Again, thinking in my brain, what happens at the end of the story? When I get toward the end, what is going on? Then question number 3, what is the moral of the story? And I know we've talked about moral earlier this week. So when you are reading that story, or when you listen to that story and you're following along reading it, you're going to be thinking, what is the moral of that story? So number 1, what happens at the beginning? Number 2, what happens at the end? And number 3, what is the moral of the story? Put your finger at the top of the page. The Ants and the Grasshopper is our title, and our first word is 1. Let's track and follow along. One sunny day in autumn, a family of ants was busy drying out the grain they had collected all summer long. Suddenly, a grasshopper appeared. He begged the ants to share their grain with him. The ants replied, "What have you been doing all summer? Haven't you stored any food for winter?" The grasshopper explained that he hadn't saved any food for winter because he was too busy singing and dancing to plan ahead. The grasshopper whined, "I was so busy making music that I didn't have any time to think about planning ahead." The ants were very annoyed with the grasshopper. They said, "You were busy making music instead of planning ahead? Well then, you better learn to sing and dance your way through winter too." They turned their backs on the grasshopper and got back to work. Now, you may pick up your pencil. Number 1, what happens at the beginning of this story? A, the ants collect some grains. B, the grasshopper finds some grains. C, the ants were busy drying out their grains. Go back into the text and look at that again. What do you see happening at the beginning? Moving on to number 2. What happens at the end of this story? Choice A, the grasshopper gets to work finding grain. B, the ants share their grains with the grasshopper. C, the ants turn their backs on the grasshopper and do not help him. Again, what happens at the end of this story? And you can go back in the story and look and find the best choice. Circle A, B, or C. And number 3, what is the moral of the story? A, it is a good idea to work together. B, there is a time for work and a time for play. Or C, singing and dancing are important. What is the moral of the story? Now, that's one that's not necessarily going to be right there in the text. It's something that you have to think about and find the best answer. So you're going to have to think, what is the moral of that story for all of us as readers? Thank you very much for doing some really good work. Going back into your text and finding those answer choices is always a good strategy. And again, remember at the beginning, we read those questions first. That's a good strategy too. Read to find out those particular answers. Have a super day.